This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Since, again, you have not been on the Melt before, maybe you could tell the listeners what first brought you to these topics, to magic, to Hermeticism, the kinds of things that you discuss in your books.
Well, as I've stated on many times in many interviews, this was an environment that I was around. I grew up next to my great uncle, who was involved in all of the major movements of the 20th century, and his father, of course, came over from Silesia, which at that time was part of the, I believe, West Prussian Empire. And they practiced a form of folk magic, which is sometimes referred to as powwow or brauche or braucherei. And that was fairly well known among the Pennsylvania Germans, although he was not of that extraction. And in fact, his experiences were much broader and included knowledge of the general Hermetic milieu. So you would have Paracelsus, but mostly more like Jacob Bima and Agrippa, those types of characters, Trithemius. So within that framework, I mean, astrology and out-of-body experiences, and I mean, tarot was novel. You know, when my mother had tarot cards in the 70s, that was novel. Her great aunts were doing the old school card reading. In fact, I just had the decks out. I didn't bring them over for the camera, but you know, they've taken a kind of a renewal in the last 10 years, 5 to 10 years. We've seen a revival of some of that. And I have some of the original decks from the turn of the century.
Cool.
So,
nice.
And of course, then as I entered my teen years, I would go to lodge meetings with him, and he was always greeted as like the elder statesman. So that was always fun.
So you sort of grew up in that environment. It wasn't something like you were rebelling against being brought up an Orthodox Christian or something like that. It was more just in the air.
Yeah, and there was more. I did get a degree in theology. I have an undergraduate in and a graduate in counseling. So I did my master's thesis in psychosynthesis, so that was nice.
What does that involve, psychosynthesis?
Well, that is, that was the problem. As Roberto Azenchelli said, it's too broad. It has no boundaries. But it was an all-encompassing view of psychotherapy that included all aspects of consciousness. Azenchelli's was an Italian Jew. His family was involved in theosophy, that is Blavatskyan theosophy. He said that his period in prison during the fascist regime was probably the most productive time of his life. So it's that type of environment in which psychosynthesis was not simply he was the first psychoanalyst in Italy. So he was the first Freudian in Italy. And then, of course, you had Jung, and then you were talking about these higher notions. And as Jolie says, well, there's all of these notions. Psychosynthesis never really took off as I think it could have. It was fairly popular in the 70s into the 80s with the human potential movement.
Yes.
And I believe it more or less, it hasn't gone away. I recently did some research. It's still strong in certain areas, but areas that we would think geographically would be the typical places where you would find it in New
Mhm.
England or Southern California, Northern California, places like this.
So, what led to you establishing, and I don't know the history outright, whether you put it together yourself or with a group of people, the Institute for Hermetic Studies? What led you to feel inspired enough to do that?
Well, there was a conference here that was sponsored by the Philosophers of Nature, which was the American sister organization of a French alchemical and Kabbalistic organization founded by Jean Dubuis. And there are many people who responded to it. This is back in the day when you could put a conference up and people would just show up. You didn't really have to do much. So they enjoyed it. Russ and Sue House were the ones who came to present. They were the folks who the burden and responsibility had fallen to for that organization. I say burden and responsibility because people don't understand how much work is truly involved in these things.
Absolutely. Excuse
And
me.
oh, sure. And people liked it, so we said we will start a local study group if you like, and things kind of moved along nicely. And eventually, we started a local study group, independent, and it was really meant to be local. In fact, we picked a name that was almost going to keep people away, you know, because this is like the mid 90s, late 90s, called the Wyoming Valley Society for Esoteric Studies. That way, if you didn't know what
Mhm.
esoteric was, we would keep folks out.
Yes. Sure.
And you know what I'm referring to here,
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. Exactly.
and we had a lot of people coming in from New York, New Jersey, DC, Boston, even coming down, which is a considerable haul.
Mhm.
So the organization had rented quarters and did very well until 9/11. We had a lot of folks who were involved in emergency response.
Mhm.
So we kind of began to hit a slide after that. And about 2 years later, we decided to go to special events only. And as special events continued to go on, we had conferences here and there, and the seminars. And then around 2011, we had a event in upstate New York, which someone said, "Hey, let's record this." So we did, and that became our free course called Unfolding the Rose, which is kind of the foundational course. We've been using that ever since. And then we just started recording all these other events and realized, hey, let's do this in an organized manner.
Mhm.
So we weren't just having the sporadic speaker coming through, and then by this time there is a body of material. I had already published 3-4 books by this point, and it was much easier to then start generating a lot of our lesson materials and monographs and this type of thing. So probably 2 years ago, we put everything up on Teachable.
Mhm.
And previously we had it on YouTube, but someone had vandalized our YouTube channel. So, things went missing and that kind of stuff.
Really? Wow.
People do stuff. You never know why. So we took it over and put it over on Teachable. And then we've been able to add more programming to it. We have coming up a 6-week class on the 3 books of occult philosophy by Agrippa.
Mhm. Mhm.
We've had classes previously on specialized aspects of classical astrology. So, like in Agrippa and some of the earlier texts, there's different ways to find the name of your daemon or holy guardian angel, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
So, we had a class on that, how you do that using classical astrological methods. And we've had really spectacular courses on how new thought even links into uh, Hermeticism through the German Romanticism.
Mhm.
Okay. Natural philosophy and natural magic.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So we've done a wide berth of things, and we've kind of announced it in a soft way. We're seeing also some growth of interest in establishing a sister group in Europe. So
Oh,
we
nice.
have IHS Europe, and they're going to be doing things in English initially. Because it is the lingua franca of that peer of really of the world, but
Mhm.
they'll also be hosting events and articles in various European languages. We do have folks who've translated some of our works into French, excuse me, not French, but Russian, Portuguese, and German. And of the official publications, that is through Wiser and Inner Traditions and Will, uh, I've been translated into uh, German, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Polish, Russian, Bulgarian, and Estonian, and it's a little bit of
Wow.
Turkish. So there's a lot of information out there for a lot of folks.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It is.
I haven't looked into Hermeticism a whole lot. So would you say it was more of a magical discipline, more alchemical? Is there an easy way to classify it, or does it encompass a lot of different things?
You can look at it as the survival of pharaonic Egyptian thought as understood in the 4th century AD, with a synthesis of Christianity, Gnosticism, a touch of Jewish mysticism. We wouldn't call it Kabbalah at that time.
Mhm.
Probably a good dose of Theravada Buddhism,
Interesting.
and also probably Greek astrology, and probably 3 or 4 other things that we can easily point to in there. And it becomes synthesized into various views. Oh, classical theurgy, of course, in Alexandria.
Mhm.
And like anything, we tend to think of movements as very organized, because many people coming from monotheism, there's, in the various sects, it's usually monotheism, what you're, the various Christian sects or aspects of Judaism or Islam. So we tend to think of it as very hierarchical and very organized and structured. And things aren't always that way,
Mhm.
and often for the longest time, they're very organic and they're very dynamic, particularly in their early years. And Hermeticism is that undercurrent of spiritual practice, of personal initiation, but also collective initiation. When I say collective, I mean working in groups, small to
Mhm.
medium groups. Okay.
Mhm.
And that purpose of initiation is, of course, self awakening, self knowledge, and to overcome many of the obstacles and burdens that people would encounter in daily life. It is really about survival of consciousness.
Mhm.
Whether you want to talk about overcoming samsara or Maya or the demiurge or however you want to phrase it, when we use the duck test, does it look like a duck, walk like a duck, quack like a duck?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's a duck, and that duck is trying to survive. Okay, and survive what? Well, we would say in the naught, the nothingness, the void from which everything comes.
Mhm.
So if we want to say what is Hermeticism all about, it's principally about a self-awakening that allows us to create a sense of self that can survive the original pressure of being.
Mhm.
That's really not much different from what you see in the various schools of yogas, Taoism, or the Tantras.
Mhm.
But we would say now, courtesy of the Renaissance, that the principal areas of focus would be astrology, alchemy, symbolism, which can take the form of either general meditations or ritual or ceremonial magic of some kind. So
So
when we
there is I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
so when we think of modern Hermeticism, meaning particularly that of the late 19th and early 20th century with the occult revival, those would be the 3 things we think of the most.
Okay. Did you
What would be the benefit of knowing the name of your demon or your guardian angel?
Well, your daemon is not a demon, a daemon. although you,
It's
although
a
you
Why
might
different
have,
why would I why would
you
I
got a,
wanna know that?
you probably got a personal one of those too. One on each shoulder. Or so, Who's whispering in your ear?
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. Use her scissors. She'll never know. That's right. Use the good ones. Um, in theory, the advantage is that it is a kind of key to your inner self. It's a
Mm,
personal mantra, for lack of a better term.
Mm.
So instead of having some chant or vibratory power given to you by an external teacher, lama, guru, friend, what have you, or from a book, this would be an inner or personal way of realizing those capacities to some degree.
So it sounds like there's different degrees of the practices, some of which are to maybe influence internal change, and some maybe to manifest some sort of external change in our lives. Would that be a good way of?
Well, it's always interconnected. Now,
Mhm.
when we talk about personal awakening, it's always internal, but there's going to be a reflexive effect because of that famous Hermetic axiom: that
Yes.
which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above.
Hmm.
So the interconnectedness is there. So, as Paracelsus said, you can't transmute without what you have not first transmuted within. So when we look at external factors, the world is really just we could call it a mirror, if you like. It reflects certain things to us. Or we could say it's a litmus test, a way of verifying certain things. One of the great problems we have in all spiritual practices is that self delusion is incredibly easy.
Sure.
And in alchemy, at least, there's no self delusion because either you transmute something or you don't.
Yeah. Sure.
Uh, in certain aspects of magic, for lack of a better term, I'm using that to include even a lot of non ritualistic but uh, mental practices. There's a certain test in the sense that either something has happened or it hasn't. So either you've made a prediction that's come true or it hasn't. Either the healing has taken place or it hasn't. Um, there are certain objectifiable markers. Not everything is completely subjective. But when we get involved in this inner work, we're really getting into our subjective states, and it can be very tempting to get lost in there because that power of imagination is the key.
Yeah.
And the imagination, according to the ancients, and at least into the Renaissance, was that facet of the human mind that allows us to connect with the invisible, the divine.
No. What was I going to say? So, okay, to simplify that, as above, so below, would that mean that it's sort of Hermeticism exists outside of dualism, wants to exist outside of dualism? Dualism doesn't play a part in it at all, or?
No, well, we exist within a dualistic framework, but dualism isn't the ultimate reality.
Mhm.
I mean, so I'm here, you're here, there's time, space. That's duality.
Mhm.
When we work even within the psychic dimension, there's duality. It's stunning how easily that is just simply not known or ignored. You have these so-called dimensions or spheres of being. That means duality. The days of creation are phases of development, phases of existence coming into beingness. Well, that's phases of duality. And it may be on cycles or scales that are fundamentally incomprehensible to us, but it's still duality.
And
And our goal is to, if you want to call it a goal, is to realize uh, the temporary nature of that, the not say unreal because it is real, but not ultimate state of that is not
mhm.
an ultimate state.
And why is it preferable, I'm assuming, to explore these ideas and do these rituals and stuff in a community, in an organization? Is there something to be had there as opposed to practicing solo?
Sure, because it's dangerous.
Sure, you can step into some things that you don't anticipate, I'm sure.
Well, if you don't, you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the reality. This stuff, if you were happy with your life, you wouldn't be doing this. So you're not happy with your life, and you go study some spiritual system, whatever it is, and maybe it's something as wonderfully as vacuous as The Secret, but at least it's something in that direction.
Sure.
It's something.
Yeah.
Well, then, in order to change your life, you've got to shake things up. Well, what happens is you have revealed to you the obstacles that you're facing, so that you can change them or transform them.
Mhm.
But if you don't know how, if you don't know what's going on, it just makes things worse for you. When you're dealing with a useful tradition, a healthy one, what you have is the entire collective experience that's come before you. So, I mean, if you want to start working on your engine on your own, that's fine. Go ahead, take it apart, see if you can get it working again. Or maybe you could use the manual, or maybe you could watch some YouTube videos, or maybe you could ask someone who knows how to do this, or you could just go to school and learn and save yourself all that aggravation. I mean, I was joking with some workers I had here. They're doing some tile work, and I joked with the guy. I said, I could have done that work in half the price in 4 times the time as a quarter as good as you. Now, we laugh at that because we know it's true in the physical dimension, but somehow
Okay.
over the last 20, 30, 40 years, people have come to think that, spirituality is just because you have to do the work yourself, that it is a do-it-yourself kit.
Mhm.
And how do you know that any of those books you're reading are worthwhile?
You got to dig your feet in there and try them out.
Okay, how long are you going to be on this planet?
80-ish
How much time do
years?
you have to waste?
Not a whole lot, unfortunately.
Okay, so if you want to waste your time as a do-it-yourself kit, go right ahead.
What do you think of disciplines like, or maybe lack of discipline? Maybe that's not a good way of putting it. Of practices like chaos magic, where it is sort of a do it yourself collage sort of situation.
Oh, people ask me this one all the time. In fact, I had a spectacular conversation about this with Stephen Davies, who translated the Gospel of Thomas. We were joking. He goes, Mark, this is like my best-selling book. It just keeps going and going. It's taking on a life of its own. I said, well, yeah, because it's a great book. You did a great translation, and we laugh about it. And, we were talking about chaos magic. Well, one of the things he said to me, he goes, well, he retired from teaching. He says, I got out just in time. I was teaching at a Catholic university, and I couldn't teach uh, comparative religion because none of my students knew anything about Christianity, not even fundamental Sunday school stuff. And there they are. They've gone through Catholic school. They've gone theoretically to church, and they know absolutely nothing. Now, within that framework, let's say, okay, chaos magic. In theory, what it says is true. But it's not going to work unless you really, really, really are convinced of the efficacy of the practice.
Mm-hmm.
So if faith, we'll call it, is the foundation of all these practices, faith in yourself, faith in the practice, faith in the teacher, faith in the teachings, faith in your fellow practitioners, then do you have enough to make it work is the question. And what does work mean? Because if it's just, getting some stuff, I mean, magic is really about moving things around. It's not necessarily about ultimate realization. Then still your benchmark is acceptable, but your benchmark is relatively low speaking.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something to be ignored. I'm not saying it's dismiss it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying on the scale of things, it's relatively low. Operative word being relative. Okay. So now where are you going to take this chaos magic? What is your organizational structure? And again, how much time do you have?
Sure. You're saying it's disciplines like chaos magic are more about reality manipulation as opposed to trying to achieve some sort of enlightened state of mind.
The folks who I've spoken to, that's always what they're focused on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it could be others have different views, but your practice, if we're going to call it a genuine spiritual practice, not simply a form of psychic technology, which is concerned only with duality. If you have a genuine spiritual practice, you have an aspect of beingness in there. Not necessarily transcendence, but an aspect of what is ultimate reality, which means your practice has to serve you in the here, but more importantly, it needs to serve you in the hereafter. And that's what I'm finding a lot of folks aren't grasping. That does your practice serve you in the hereafter? And I don't know. Well, you better find out, because you believe it or not, your ticket's punched, and that train is going to pull into the station, and you're going to be getting off. So you need to know what your destination point is. Now, if you don't care, then it doesn't matter.
I want to ask you about symbology, because it seems to be that there's this trend now for symbols to be used in what seems to be, to me, a very pedestrian way. So you'll go to a shop and see pentagrams and Baphomet, or just some what could be considered dark energy symbology that's being sold to kids, like young children even. What are your thoughts about the power of these symbols being placed on someone who's innocent, who maybe doesn't necessarily understand the meaning of those symbols, but it's cool to them because it's something that they see at like a Hot Topic or one of these shops in the mall?
I love the term pedestrian.
Seems apt.
It is, and it has to do with foot. Putting your foot down on something that is kind of trampling under,
Uh-huh.
an aspect of kind of dismissiveness, even sacrilegious. We call what you're talking about is occulture.
Mhm.
That is the occult moving into popular culture, and it's happened at various times. Um, this is probably among the strongest. The problem with it is that the symbolism is disconnected from tradition.
Yeah.
So to dismiss it is to, it's like when folks are wearing crucifixes as a fashion statement, or okay, well, anything else. Just because it doesn't have meaning for you doesn't mean it doesn't have meaning for someone else. And by someone else, they don't necessarily mean the person sitting next to you on the bus.
Right.
And this is where we get into the notion of what is spirituality. There is a tendency to think in very selfish terms. That is, myself, my path, what I want. Give me the book, give me the seminar, get out of my way. Help me because I am'd you and I'm in need. Like we live in little pop-up boxes, oh, I need you. And then, so that kind of selfishness, that I don't want to use the word narcissism because it's so abused, and it really is selfishness, self-absorption in a negative way.
Mhm.
We see in that use of symbols too, as if you can just take in things and plug them on. Well, if they have a meaning, and that meaning can change over time depending on how they're used,
Mhm.
uh, they're attached to what we would call an egregore, a collective consciousness of some kind. And I remember years ago, uh, maybe about 10 years ago, I'd have to look it up. I have the essay around here somewhere that I wrote. I go into Dunkin' Donuts. It's a nice day, it's sunny. I got to meet somebody down there, and he's just taking his time, right? So I grab a coffee, and this girl, all of maybe 18, maybe, is waiting on me. And she reaches out, and I can still see it right now. And she has this tattoo on her wrist. And I can see it. It's a goetic sigil. And I said, oh, who's that? And she said, well, it's a sigil. I said, I know what it is. I asked you who it was. And she looked at me like, and I said, "Oh, don't judge." I said, "I don't have to." I said, "But just remember this: the life is in the blood. You feed that every time you breathe." And people I know with tattoos are horrified when I tell them that. They're horrified
What was
because
her? What was
she
her?
she was shocked.
Uh-huh.
I said, just remember that as long as you have a good relationship with it. Well, and that's it. People do stupid things. They think they're going to put the sigil of some demon on, and it's going to just be hip and cool. You don't know what you're putting on, what phone number you're dialing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I remember one place I worked. This was great because it was a Catholic institution, and it was a spectacular building built in 1915. It was just great. And I was in charge of the restoration of its chapel, which was probably the best project I ever had. And one of the workers there, he had a lot of body art, and I had a painting on my wall in my office. I'm trying to remember what it was, what the name of it was. It was a famous one. You would have recognized it from the what were they called? Ah, that body of English romantic artists, the
Pre-Raphaelites.
pre-Raphaelites. Yes, that's exactly it. And it was the crystal ball, and the woman is standing there with a crystal
Mhm.
ball. The book is open, the skull is there, the wand is over, and she's standing on checker floor. And I had that in my office. And my boss, he didn't know what to say about it. But I said, "Dude, this is what you want me to do. You're always asking me to gaze into the crystal ball. This is my job. I got to tell the future for you." And there's some stories there too. So this guy, anyhow, I said, "Hey, nice tattoo." He had a tattoo of what was it? A sigil from, I think, the Greater Key of Solomon of Jupiter on his one arm. So he lifts up his shirt, and he's got Tree of Life front and back on both sides.
Wow.
Wow.
And I said, "Good." I hope they got the Hebrew right. I'm busting the stones about it, right? I don't really care, you know. And I think that type of activity is in some ways counterproductive to one's work,
Mm.
because you have to be selective about what type of quality of energies you're working with, and you're inviting into your life and into your life stream and into your life force, which we said the life is in the blood. Uh, and in that case, it would really be the nefesh uh, within that person. Their pranic field is, for the listeners, your pranic field, your energy. Okay, that something like that. So anyhow, uh, when we look at all these symbols in day-to-day life, we have to recognize that we're really doing ourselves a disservice by overloading ourselves. And we're particularly doing ourselves a disservice by having too many of them in a practice, because your mind does not have the capacity to organize and synthesize them effectively to be useful to you. That's why when you have a practice, you often are told to have a very narrow set of things.
Mhm.
So even if you have multiple initiations within a particular school, what you have in front of you when you practice on your altar or anything like that is still very limited to that practice.
Mm.
So you may have lots of stuff, but for the period of practice, or whatever that is, for 7 days or 7 weeks or 7 months or 7 years, it's just this,
Mm.
so that you can focus your attention, and in that focus, you acquire energy, you acquire capacity for work, because all of our practices should increase our capacity for realization, and realization brings with it not only knowledge but inherent energy as well, or what you might say in the yogas they might call shakti. We would call it uh, the vital life force or energy is inherently increased with that realization.
It's interesting because we have a son who's 14 years old who is kind of playing with different costumes right now in his reality of, trying to figure out who he is and what he is about. And he has adopted um, some symbols that I don't necessarily think are consistent with who he is as a person. And Chris and I have talked about this back and forth. And, Chris's attitude as he has communicated to me is that, he's figuring himself out. He's kind of playing with this imagery. And what I said to him was, it doesn't really matter if he believes in these symbols or these energies. What matters is that people for thousands of years have believed in these energies, and he is potentially connecting his energy and his body and his life force by wearing these symbols around to that stream. Do you think that there is a way that you can carry yourself or protect yourself where you can wear a pentagram or have the tattoo of Baphomet on a t-shirt or something that you wear around as though it's on your skin but it's not? Do you think that you can separate yourself from that, or are you absorbing some of these thousands of years of energy?
Well, it all depends too on the images. I mean, if you've got the typical Baphomet of the tarot card, depending on the decks, even it has this that really does have a different connotation than, say, the Baphomet of the Church of Satan.
Mm,
And even then, within the Church of Satan and those different satanic groups, they have different interpretations as to what this really means. Uh, so at the end of the day, your connection is weak.
mm,
But okay, the connection is weak. But what is your connection to that is strong? What is your strong connection? So if all you have is this weak connection to these teenage angst, rebel without a clue symbols,
mhm,
which is what most of it is, what is on the other side of that? Do you have a strong connection to something? Weak force, strong force. Weak magnetism. Strong magnetism. So what is pulling you and pushing you through your life? So I think that for a lot of folks, a lot of kids, it's not a big deal.
mhm.
I mean, I'm reminded of the old Satanic Panic in the '80s into the '90s. But even within that, there was reason for concern.
Sure.
It was beyond. I'm going to say, because I was there at the ground level.
Mhm.
It it was it was insane. I mean, I have recordings that I had to give at that time to for district attorneys and for social workers. And I wasn't that old myself. I was fresh out of college. And friends that children and youth say, we need someone to know. I don't know anything about this. We'll find out.
Mhm.
And it wasn't like you had easy access to things. It was difficult. So trying to explain to people that, particularly then, when people had very strong beliefs still, that this really isn't a big deal. This is just some teenage acting out. Yeah, well, that is, but this might not be over here. And to
Mhm.
the untrained eye, all they see, it's all the same thing.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's the issue. So to the untrained eye, and that would include the person wearing it, it's just a cool fashion statement.
Mhm.
But what
Yep.
they don't understand on the invisible doesn't see it that way.
Exactly.
So again, the connection isn't strong, but they don't have, unless you have something that is stronger still, which if you did, you wouldn't be wearing it.
Right.
Uh, where does this period of ambiguity lead you? That's the question. And a lot of folks, they'll be okay.
Mhm.
but you don't want to be or see your kids among those that aren't.
Exactly. And he's now been given cards that are tarot cards to conjure demons.
Oh, actually, yeah,
And and you know, where I land with all of that is that I don't want to charge it with rebellion, where it's like,
yeah.
oh, we don't like this, so now this makes this even more attractive and alluring
Oh,
because
right.
it's getting a negative reaction.
Were those the Goetia cards that someone made a few years back? Like they were specifically, now just so the listener knows, and so I'm clear on this too. These weren't just your general tarot cards.
No.
These were a specific deck of cards specifically designed for.
Yes, and
Yeah,
it says in the pack, this is to
right.
conjure demons.
And okay, so we're talking. I know the decks. There's two or three like this. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure we're talking about the same one. Yeah, and that I had a friend. Well, I still do, but had meaning the experience for them is some time ago. Um, who their son was doing something similar, and I said, really, this is just not good for you to have. It's bad for your shop. It's bad for the image. It's not healthy for him. You really should stop it. Politely, just with your son, politely, just say, we can't do that here. Have him do something else. There's a lot of other things you can do. Let's do that. And, she ended up coming down. I went in to visit her one day, and she's in the hospital with this really weird blood disease, you know? And, I just said later, I said, listen, these things feed on blood. It's what they do. You need to understand that. You need, you can't have them doing this. You got to stop this. He's a nice person, someone I like. I really do. But couldn't set the appropriately firm boundary when it was needed. And that was a boundary that was needed. Now, is there a time and place to deal with what we'll call incredibly aggressive forces? Sure. That's just not it. And most people aren't there. Most practitioners aren't at that place. We joke about that now. In fact, when we look back to going back to the Satanic Panic, 80s, early 90s,
Mhm.
the neo-pagans, particularly the witches, were very strong. Say, we're not witches, we're Wiccans. Of course, the witchcraft revival of the 60s and 70s, which they're riding on, which had the really interesting stuff, gets transformed sometime in the early 80s into a eco-feminist religious movement by
Mhm.
Yes.
Starhawk. So
Yeah.
with that, it's transformed into a kind of uh, Celtic revival
Mhm.
approach. Okay, so it's very different from what was happening 10 years earlier. And
Right.
this rides into the present with some minor variations,
Mhm.
but they were strong in saying, we don't believe in the devil. That's a Christian construct. We're not. I used to coach them. Okay, now when the media comes up to you, do not say we are not Satanists. So what was the first thing these morons would say? Okay, so you can try and help them, but and I say that because there's the view within Wicca at that time and magic at that time was so adamant of not being confused with that stuff. And we
Mhm.
I joked about it a few years ago, starting on some of these podcasts. I said, now flash forward. In the last 5 years, the explosion of gourmet grimoires focusing on demonology and focusing on witchcraft as involving Satan. It's like, yeah, I got to laugh at it because there's no context for it. The
Mhm.
Yeah.
the practitioners, and I use that term loosely, and this is where you said about a group, why a group is important. In a good group, they don't have a historical context for what they're doing.
Mhm.
I mean, I've given presentations where it's not just that they don't know Sunday school Christianity, they don't even know the names of people from the witchcraft traditions from the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Mhm.
And I'm not even a witch. That's not my thing. It's just part of the historical, cultural
Right.
milieu in which I've had to work and travel. So when I bring up guys like, Frater Albertus or Israel Regardi, they may recognize Crowley for better or worse, but I'm not even a Crowleyite. I don't even bring him up. It's stunning how much collective information has been lost. Now, when I say
Mm,
lost, I don't mean gone forever. I mean disconnected from.
Mhm.
So
right.
it's created this belief that I, as an individual practitioner, can grab this book, do whatever I want,
Totally.
and I have not only no connection to anyone else, but I have no responsibility or
Yeah.
relationship to anything. This is just about me and what I want.
Mhm.
It's cultural amnesia.
Cultural amnesia. Perfect. Thank you. That's a great term, along with pedestrian. Yeah.
She's
I'll
chalking
write
them
those.
up here.
I'm trying. Well, we need one more. Three, right? Three's a charm.
I'm,
So, you know.
I'm a college girl. What can I
Well,
say?
Yeah.
so chaos magic would be the epitome of that. Sort of pick and choose, try on the costume and see how it fits. And so, I mean,
Yeah.
with all that being said, is there something to be
Now, if
said
you're an
about?
enlightened being, that's not a problem.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, because it doesn't matter, or if you're closer to one, we'll just say if you're close to one, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter because you've got the framework and the mental skill set and you can make it work. But if you're just the average Joe or Jane, shopping through what's left of your occult bookstore, or worse yet, roaming on Amazon because nobody buys books in stores anymore, then
Yeah.
or turn into someone that someone else say, well, what was the book you're reading? I mean, you're in trouble.
Well, so is there something to be said about magical organizations and societies remaining relatively obscure?
Yeah, that's a big one now because it's a plus and a minus. What you need is within these organizations is a checkpoint. In Freemasonry we call that guarding the Western Gate. You got to guard that Western Gate because once someone's in, they're hard to get out. Damage is done.
Mm.
But you need to have ways of vetting people as
Mhm.
they go along. So what a lot of the systems did is they created degrees. And degrees would be like a class, and you would learn certain things in the class, and that would take a certain period of time. And, they get to know you and get to decide, sometimes based on the right criteria, sometimes not, if you're capable of moving forward. So the organizations need to find ways to better vet members. But the problem is you have very few organizations that have large enough in-person memberships where that's possible. Most of the organizations, there's some form of correspondence course.
Yeah.
And then you're really lucky if you get enough people together to have a local group or to have a conference once or twice a year. So that capacity for vetting is dramatically reduced.
Mhm.
Now, we can say to some degree that all the secrets are self-secret, that only with a certain level of inner awakening does the capacity become revealed to you. But with that said, I've seen a tremendous amount of damage, particularly as the publishing industry just explodes in producing material. I've written a lot of books, and I tell people, look, I'm very grateful to my publishers, but you need to understand, they never once asked me, does any of this work?
Yeah.
Mm,
They just
Course.
asked me how many books I can sell.
Yes.
mm.
And that's just the reality you're in. So if you don't take the time to attempt to vet the instruction that you're getting, and this is another part. I did a interview with Gary Vassi a few weeks ago on his podcast, and we were talking about different experiences. I said the problem too is these organizations don't train people how to be teachers. Now, a couple of years ago at the Institute for Hermetic Studies, we instituted a teacher training program. And to be really clear on that, I said, when we're teaching you, we're training you how to be teachers. But to keep it in perspective, we don't have the capacity or the time to teach you to be a PhD, like a yeshe in some Tibetan
Mhm.
monastery, because they have resources to do that. That takes a tremendous amount of money and dedication for that to happen.
Yes.
And they have a support for it. We don't have that. So I said, what we're going to train you to do is be paramedics. So the difference is you're not going to be a surgeon, you're going to be a paramedic or even a general practitioner. We're going to teach you just enough to know how to manage the situation, and when problems arise, as they will, how to manage those problems with people and where to turn for good, solid advice to manage that. Because people will crack under the pressure. They're supposed to. That's the purpose of this work. And that seems to be lost. It's not just so you can get a new boyfriend or girlfriend or car or job. That's good. Those are secondary concerns and practices. But the primary concern is the reforming of your personality, the reforming of your sense of self so that it can withstand the pressures of beingness itself without any other supports. The power of what we call the abyss or the naught or the void, the Ein Sof. Pick a name, whatever it is, but it's the original jettison point, which a lot of these schools don't tell you. They just simply don't talk about it. So you have to ask the school, what is the teaching? What will it do for me? And how will I know? What are some of the signs of success along the way? And then the teachers have to be able to ascertain that as best they can. Now, they don't have to be perfect, but they at least have to know their own limits and be able to help you recognize yours. And these schools don't teach their teachers how to teach. If you are in a school long enough, you get promoted simply by surviving, and that then gives you a certain degree of authority, understandably, because resources and people are limited. But it doesn't mean you know how to engage with the deep psychological issues that may arise or the paranormal phenomena. I mean, a lot of folks, for better or worse, who've never experienced some really bizarre phenomena. And that's okay. But when it happens, you need to know what to do with it or how to handle it or the people it's happening around. One of our board members joked to me several years ago. He said, you're the only person I know that has a form letter for people contacting you about poltergeists. I said, yeah, it's easier on the response here. But these are serious issues that I'm bringing up and that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because without infrastructure, without institutional development, and without building the people to build the institution and the institution building the people, we shape our institutions and then our institutions shape us. So without doing that, Western magical groups are often constantly reinventing the wheel and not for their benefit, because the well of source material that they go to tends to be fairly limited. So a lot of them just end up looking like variations of one another because they are. And that's okay. But then errors creep in about even why you're doing what you're doing. Or someone says, you know what, I don't want our rituals to look like those, so we're going to create our own. Well, okay, but do you have the capacity to do that effectively? What constitutes an effective ritual? What is the structural components that matter in it? And how do we test that to make sure there's a certain degree of reliability? And not that rituals are flipping a switch. There's certainly not. Too many people treat it like that. But there's a certain balance is what I'm talking about, and structural beginning, middle, end, purpose, that type of stuff.
Why do you think that they're in the past, and I'm thinking OTO for some reason is what keeps coming to mind, that a lot of these organizations or chapters of these organizations, magical organizations, have degenerated into sort of like this infighting, these ego battles? Why do you think that has been sort of a stereotype of those situations?
Because you have people who didn't grow up around people doing practices.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this discussion with Pat Zaleski, and he's mentioned it several times. It's no secret. He was in the environment with the last surviving Golden Dawn Lodge, whereas other people were just reading Regardie and thought, well, this is the whole of it.
Yeah.
And one of the problems with the Golden Dawn is it really doesn't have a foundational philosophical view. That's another problem. And it kind of does, but you don't get that till you're like 7 = 4 when they should be giving it to you as soon as you walk in the door. So, it's that kind of stuff. So you get folks who really want to do something crazy. They want to do something wild and exciting. I remember years ago, I wrote an essay on this, posted in Vox Hermes. A guy I knew, worked with him for several years in our group. He emails me and asks me if there's any groups around because he wanted to do something different. Well, that's not enough of a reason. Now, one of the problems with the OTO, and I am not now, nor have I ever been a member of the Ordo Templi Orientis. Okay, so just be clear on that.
Yeah.
I sat in the James Wasserman sat next to me once, and as we were waiting to pick my son up from school, and said, "How come you never petitioned?" And my response to him was, "Well, because of the members," of which he laughed. So the point is that their mission statement, if I understand it correctly, is that anyone in the world has the right to petition for membership. So anyone can at least get the first degree. So as an organization, that's what they have, the largest number of people in that degree. But what they don't have is a lot of people further along. Now, why that is, I can't tell you. I don't know. I don't know their internal structures. But infighting is because people don't understand what the purpose of their being together is. And when you have a lot of new stuff like constantly being generated, it's content generation, like on a blog or something. I mean, you guys know what it's like. People ask me why I don't do a regular podcast. I said, because I burn through talent in a year. And then I just have to go out and find people who are going to talk for an hour or two. And I don't want to do that. Yeah. So it's the same in these magical practices. They throw a net too widely in order to find something that is exciting or interesting or unique to them, rather than focusing on a particular set of practices. And then trying to understand how that works. Now, if you have continuity for 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 100, 200 years, then you have a collective knowledge base to draw upon, theoretically at least, to help inform your experiences and your practices. But if you've only been around for 10 or 15 or 5, and the people who are in charge really aren't much more along than you, they just happen to be there first to get the charter, I think that's where a lot of the conflict comes in with a lot of groups, not just those, but in a lot of groups. And the other one is responsibility. What I've found is, and we've had this discussion probably 6 times in the last week with different people in different groups, the political orientation of too many within these movements fundamentally translates into the idea of something for nothing. And they simply don't want to do infrastructure building. They don't want to do organizational enhancement. They don't want to build something that's going to last for their children and grandchildren because they don't think that far ahead. So what we have is, within the modern magical community, is books primarily written for the 15-year-old male,
right?
Written by people who are probably in their 20s or 30s. So we have adolescent books for adolescents written by post-adolescents, and calling it a spiritual practice.
And completely out of any context. So what did you think of that, fine lass?
I liked it. It was fun. He was super smart. I love it when I take notes and there's things that I want to look up after we talk to someone. Yeah. Cool times. I'm really interested in this psychosynthesis that he was talking about. I do know a little bit, very tiny bit, about the human potential movement.
Yes. New thought.
And I have that Gospel of Thomas book. So that just reminded me that I want to read that.
There aren't a whole lot of books that we don't have.
I know.
The Satanic Bible.
Do we have that?
Any Danielle Steele book? No, that we don't have. I'm saying.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't think we have the Satanic Bible or any Daniel
We
Steele.
don't. We don't.
No. I do have a book written by Erica Jong about Henry Miller. Yeah.
Pro or against?
I think again. I think she was not for him. She was against him.
She was one of those Bamanists, wasn't she? Or I guess she still is,
I think so.
unless she's renounced herself.
She and her daughter said that lesbians are only lesbians to get men's attention, which I always thought was
I'm
hilarious.
sure many lesbians would agree.
She said that on Oprah once, so there it is on film. I do have the receipts.
She
as
means
you say.
in the context of porn, right?
No, in the
Oh, okay.
in the context of like bars, like if two women are in a bar and they start making out, they're doing it for male attention.
Most likely they're going to be in a lesbian bar, though, doing that. But these days, who knows? I mean, people just do it because the right Taylor Swift song comes on.
You know, you never know.
What's the song, the pop song, I Kissed a Girl Tonight or something like that?
That's Katy Perry.
Yeah, I know that's not.
And
Oh, that's Katy Perry? Was that
Katy
recent?
Perry. It was about 10 years ago. I kissed a girl and I liked it.
I Kissed a Girl and I liked it. And and I blacked it out, probably is what the second part of that should be. Right?
Yeah, it's on Instagram now. It's in your what is that called? Your stories.
In my Instagram? In one's Instagram.
That girl who
Gotcha.
did that. Yeah. This went weird.
I know.
Quickly.
Let's just back out while we can. Yeah.
Quickly. Yes, The Unfolding Rose. That was cool. Talking
I like the
about
title.
that.
Mhm.
Event in upstate New York in the 90s that he did. Like to see that. I bet that's super, super interesting. Agrippa. 3 books on philosophy.
Mhm.
Yes.
They have all those in one. Llewellyn put out a edition with all 3 of those in one fine tome.
Here?
No.
Oh.
No.
Had past tense?
They have already put it out.
They
yeah.
have.
Yes.
I thought you said you had.
No.
Okay.
I was wanting to get back to the satanic panic stuff because I'm always interested in discussing that with new people, because I personally think that that was a sort of a distraction campaign to take attention off of real satanic things, like all these the false memories institute or whatever, trying to tell all these people that they didn't have the experiences that they claim to have had.
Yeah. I wanted to too.
I love that.
Yes.
I can tell when you have something to say because your yeps get closer together. Yep. It's like when you're backing out of a parking space with your car and you're getting close to another car. Yep.
I did. No, I wanted to touch back on that because we were talking about something that we've talked about ad nauseum together, but we've also talked about with other people on the show about the same subject, about symbology and imagery and the connections of those things to the innocent, and the innocent wearing these symbols without really knowing what the symbols mean. And I think, from my perspective, I think that energetically there is some feeding of those beasts by doing that.
I can see your point of view, but I think that there's more nuance involved myself. I think it's a case by case basis. It just depends on what kid is wearing it. And I think it is based on the intention of the producer of the shirt. If it was scrawled in stag blood by a coven of naked, insert something, make your own Mad Lib.
Pagans.
With evil in their hearts, then yeah, maybe not.
Right. Okay. But what I'm saying is this negative force, this negative energy, that if you were linking your energy, even a thread of your energy to that energy, you are feeding that energy. So that becomes a ritual even if you don't co-sign off on that, because the agreement that that entity or that energy has made is that anything that bears my face or bears my name, I call dibs. I call energetic dibs. So, oh my God, sorry. So
I heard that
I
in
know,
3D
sorry.
surround sound.
So what I'm saying is,
I'm-
it doesn't matter if, like, if I'm wearing a shirt that says, I love Jesus Christ, and it doesn't matter how deeply in the spectrum of love that love goes. I am connecting my energy with this other force. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you're stating that as a fact, but really it's your point of view, and so is my point of view. I think that I would say sure, but it depends on the person wearing it. Some persons may be um, have a more solid sense of self, and able to let certain things roll off their back. Certain uh, very naive people might be susceptible to being guided by certain things. I would say, who was Jesus Christ? Did he even exist? Was he the person that we're led to believe he is? Like what he said about Baphomet, Baphomet, whatever you want to call it. It's not as simple as that. It's not like the satanics, they kind of co-opted things. People,
Right.
symbols get traded back and forth. Who knows what the pentagram originally meant? We really don't know any of that. So that is where I'm coming from. I think that there's just a lot of moving parts, and it's not a black or white situation myself.
Right. I also think it's one of the things that he said that resonated with me, is that it is also contingent on the people around you
Yeah.
and who is supporting or influencing that.
Sure.
And in this particular situation that we are in, that we talk about, there's someone that has some influence over our child who is pushing this narrative and really, really um, feeding this fire
This
and buying demon cards and conjure demons and right. So to me, I think that that influences and affects whether or not these things are charged.
Sure. I just want to remind you that this is the public part, and we did mention that other thing and part of that in the public part too, and I would prefer not to mention in the public part. But,
Right.
or either that or just go, a friend of mine does this. Maybe. Anyway, yeah, no, I understand completely, but there's us too and our
Right.
context. So
Right. And that's why um I think it's okay to talk about this publicly, because I think it's okay to push up against that and say, I'm not down with that. I'm not down with the devil or wearing demonic imagery on my body, or I don't have any demonic tattoos or anything. I love that comment he made to that person that was wearing the sigil. Do you remember what he said?
something about a who is that, or
No, what he said about the blood. It lives
oh,
in the
yeah,
blood.
yeah, you're pumping blood into that or something.
Whoa.
Mind blown. No, that was a good way of putting it for
Yeah,
sure.
it's amazing.
Made me feel self-conscious about my chaos sphere tattoo, which I just thought was a cool design. But who knows what egregore I'm feeding?
Exactly.
I think it's pretty nebulous. Because that's where I'm coming from, and that's the energy that I don't imbue it with. So it can't control me. I am a conscious navigator of my being,
Yeah.
and I don't let anything have any control over me, and as far as that's concerned.
And you don't make that devil reptile face that you used to make a lot before when you were eating lots of sugar. So maybe you've killed the demon.
devil reptile face.
You used to do this thing that freaked me out, like where you would wag your tongue and do the
To be silly or like in a fit of
well,
rage?
I don't know. I think some was you were channeling is what it felt like.
Interesting.
I was
There are several comments came to mind, but I'm not gonna say any of them.
I was telling someone earlier today, I was talking about our world and our reality, and I was saying, one thing that I really love is that you have a very quick wit and that you have passed that on to the children, that the boys, I've noticed this in the past 5 years as they've developed and grown, their wit has grown and developed. And I was saying to this person, we laugh a lot. And I feel like that's such a great balance is that what you're doing is you're teaching a quickness of the mind, like how to observe something and then immediately be able to speak to that and do it in a humorous way. And I think that is a invaluable skill.
Well, thank you. I take that as a compliment.
It's a huge compliment.
That's why I don't laugh out loud much, is because most humor moves too slow for me, because I'm already made that joke in 5 different ways inside of my head. But really also too, it's that I don't come from a boisterous, verbose, like outward projecting family.
Yeah.
So we're like the brethren in Garrison Keeler's Prairie Home Companion stuff. We just kind of are very stoic, and so that's probably a part of it too.
But I think it's a great, as opposed to like weaponizing your body, it's a great way to engage with people, and that is extremely disarming, is like being able to make someone laugh when maybe you don't necessarily get along with that person, or
For sure.
you're kind of cutting through tension or cutting through something with humor. And I definitely see this, like the honing of that with Nico, but I also really see this quickening happening with Arvo, where he's getting better and better and better at being funny,
Mhm.
like quick, like seeing something and being able to like nail it in a very hilarious way. And I
Mhm.
love that.
For sure. And sometimes I think that I it takes me for some reason, although I should know way better now, where your jokes land, like where you mean them to land and where I have them land, which is ham-handed and wrong half the time. So you're incredibly hilarious. You're funny as hell. You've got a great sense of humor and are very playful. So I need to be better about knowing where your jokes land and not thinking that they're landing someplace completely different.
I have this sense of humor of a 12-year-old boy, and that's great when you're a 12-year-old boy. It's confusing when you're a 54-year-old woman, because people are like, "What the fuck are you talking about? What is that? Like, where is that coming
But I
from?"
should be used to that now. I
But
should know that.
it's great with the kids because
They know exactly where it
because they know
lands.
exactly where I'm coming from, and so we have that very synergistic humor that is a lot of fun.
Well, I'm admittedly too serious most of the time, so
You're the dad, so you very much are like the adult in the group a lot
what a
of the
drag. I
time.
equated adults with fuddy-duddies when I was growing up and still do. Like my peers that I've known for years and years and years, not you, Brett, are all, I mean, not all, but
Yeah.
they're fucking
Yeah.
fuddy fucking duddies.
Yeah, but I think part of it is that you have to keep the ship steered in the right direction.
We'll go with that. We'll go with that. Anyway,
But this is a great combo, and
it
I'm
was a great
interested in
conversation.
soft white underbelly. That sounds like
Mhm.
something that's right up my alley
So
too.
I didn't understand. Jordan Peterson is interviewing prostitutes, and
No,
okay,
no, no, no. No, he pivoted to another
uh-huh,
thing. He
okay.
said that this is a channel, a show that's on YouTube called Soft White Underbelly.
I have to look into it.
Yeah, so I wrote it down. Yeah, but I thought it was funny that I thought he said knowing the name of your demon. I was like, why would I want to know the name of my demon? But he said Damon.
Because you know not to say it.
Yeah.
If you know the name of your demon.
Right. But then I thought, that's a way to, it's like, don't think of a pink elephant. But if you know the name of some negative sphere or negative energy in you, maybe it's a way of diffusing that instead of
Could be.
not saying it. Maybe a way of diminishing that thing's power.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I did want to get more into that. The whole guardian angel, Greek astrology aspect. I wanted to ask him about sidereal astrology compared to equal house system.
Yeah,
Yada,
there's lots
yada,
of stuff.
yada.
Not
Yeah.
to mention his book on astral projection and lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
Lots more to pick old Mark's brain about.
Yeah, I like it.
Yes.
When you do that, it looks weird.
Okay.
Just so you know, on
Thank
the
you.
camera, because we have to no, you shifted the camera down. I was like, that is not good, because I like to write and do stuff, and it just I felt like it made my hands. And then you were on the phone, and he was watching you, and you were on the phone. I was like, can we just
for 15 seconds?
Yeah, we need to do a tech check before.
I wasn't
camera.
checking messages. I was writing something on the grocery list that I thought of randomly, which I don't know if that's any better or not. But
oh my god,
I
love you. Way. You're awesome. You're hilarious. Oh, I need Cocoa Puffs.
I don't eat Cocoa Puffs. Okay. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully you got something positive from this. The Melt Podcast at protonmail.com or
hunter-muse at protonmail.com.
We
Look
love
at my
you.
little doggies up there. I put the doggies up there. They're so cute. We love you.
We love you. Thank you for listening or watching. And there's more fantastic stuff coming. And keep suggesting guests, because we've gotten a lot of great guests from patrons and listeners.
That's right.
Throwing things in front of us. So please don't hesitate.
Do it.
All right. Ta-ta.
Yeah.